Did you know that the word rune means secret or mystery? Unlocking their knowledge meant understanding the mysteries of the world. And that's exactly what Oden set out to do. The king of the gods and the knowledge thirstiest of them all. But how did he do that? And why did Oden want this knowledge? And what did the runes mean in everyday Viking society? Let's dive in. In the most famous story, the Allfather, who always sought wisdom and knowledge, knew that in the giant Mimir's well lay all the knowledge of the cosmos. So Oden went and sought the well at the roots of the world tree in Jotunheim, the realm of the giants. There he was stopped by Mimir himself, who guards his well, and for all the world's knowledge and wisdom, the Allfather sacrificed one eye. Hello everyone, I'm Josie, I'm a Swedish illustrator and I have a massive interest in mythology, especially Norse mythology, having grown up with a father who taught Scandinavian studies and could read runes. I'm back with the story of Oden and the runes by popular demand. If you're new here, I'm currently working on a creative project that relates to Norse mythology. In that process, I decided to share some things that I thought was interesting. I hadn't actually planned on making this particular video because I thought Oden was kind of well known, but this topic is really interesting and so is Oden himself. First, just a small disclaimer. I'm doing my very best to create a kind of cozy time when I relay this information. Same with my illustrations. I don't want to in any way glorify violence or self-harm, but it is an inherent part of these stories. I just felt because I normally have a very cozy vibe, it might be jarring to some. Secondly, this video is here to serve as an overview. It's almost impossible to give you a full, nuanced deep dive in under 30 minutes, especially considering the nature of these sources. So the Vikings lived between the 800s and the 1200s roughly, and a lot of the surviving sources come from the later part of that time frame. As the Swedish illustrator and author Johan Egerkrans has said in his book about the Norse gods, most of later sources, specifically with regards to the Norse mythology and the tales, and interpretations, they all trace back to the same original sources, the Eddas, Prose Edda and the Poetic Edda. And as for how people thought about it in the age of the Vikings, we can't know for sure, and it may have fluctuated over this 400-year period. Surviving written sources are scant. There's also an issue of bias, what has survived, and it can only give us part of the truth. Language changes over time, our understanding of words change over time, phrasing, intention, interpretation, and also the overarching spirit of a particular era that we may not be aware of as we live it affects how we interpret these sources. It's not necessarily a coincidence that more mystical interpretations emerged during the later 19th century, in a time when mysticism and spiritualism and romanticism was part of the general zeitgeist, compared to the more sober or, I guess, empirical interpretations of later 20th century and more recent theories. And yes, I'm speaking generally, but I hope you understand what I'm saying. Culture that we live in affects how we view things and how we interpret things. We are blind to what we know and the general attitudes of our time. One example, I read a historic source from the 1200s about King Olof Konung, who died only 2 centuries earlier, around the year 1000. The source from the 1200s, which is technically, from our point of view, the same era, could not conclude with certainty how he got his title of Konung, what it had originally meant, or what event it may have referred to. Sköt or sköt potentially meaning skatt, as in tax, so whether he collected tax or was forced to pay tax, it was unsure. So even though they were closer culturally than we are, they still had no idea how to interpret. Now, obviously, we're roughly 1,000 years removed from the Viking Age, and all we can rely on are the surviving sources from the time and archaeological finds. And sure, there's a lot of it, but again, it's the bias of what has survived. So when I talk about rune magic as it was potentially practiced 1,000 years ago, I'm sticking with what has been recorded in original sources, which is scant, and what has been found in Swedish archaeological sites and exists in museum records from that area. On a complete side note, I'm really worried about historical literacy declining, but with all the AI-generated imagery and texts online, and just very few places cite their sources. So that's why I'm sticking to university articles and official museum records and articles and analysis from the people who firsthand studied these objects. Anyway, let's not worry about that. We are here to talk about Oden, among other things. Who was he? In Norse mythology, Oden is referred to as King of the Gods, sort of the Norse equivalent of Zeus in Greek mythology. He is associated with wisdom and the search for knowledge, this being central themes in the stories of him. He chooses the brave fallen in the battlefields and takes them to Valhalla, one of several death kingdoms or death realms. So just to be clear, other than Hel and Valhalla, depending on your status in society, your gender, maybe different gods host different realms for the dead. Odin is a necromancer, a shapeshifter. He can foresee the future and he can wield magic. So he is a Seidman, which is what a male practitioner of magic was called. And he is the only male god in the pantheon who has this ability. And for those of you who saw my Norner Seid video, you'll know that in Viking society the gender roles were very rigid. And this was seen as a taboo. It was very rare and frowned upon, seen as an abnormality if a man practiced Seid. What's interesting is that Odin isn't proud, or he doesn't seem to mind practicing this taboo. He still seeks to understand these prophetic powers in spite of it being unmanly. And still, even through this shameful side of him, he's still the All-Father, and his status as King of the Gods isn't compromised because of it. He's the god of war, magic, rage, and skaldekonst, which translates to poetry and storytelling. As you can see, the functions of the gods in Norse mythology aren't as neatly categorized. And you will see this when I talk about other gods as well. They have a very wide spectrum of powers, I guess, and, things that they rule over. Odin is accompanied by his two ravens, Hugin and Munin, whose names translate to thought and memory. And fun fact, these old words survive in expressions in Swedish today, like håg, which is derived from the same root as Hugin. Like we say slå ur hågen, take it out of your thoughts, to stop thinking about it, slå ur hågen. Also, if you want to remember something, you have to komma ihåg, so keep it in mind, keep it in thought. And memory in Swedish today is minne, which is a surviving remnant of munin. And the ravens Hugin and Munin fly far and wide and return to Odin to tell him of the goings on in the worlds. And he's very worried for the day that they do not return, especially Munin. But we'll come back to this. Odin also has two wolves that accompany him to varying degrees, Gjere and Freke. Gjere meaning desire, which can be found in the Swedish words begär, gärna, and girighet. And Freke vaguely meaning voracious. And it lives on in Swedish today in fräck, which has a slightly altered meaning today of being brazen, audacious, or in a lighter context, cheeky. Odin's eight-legged horse, Sleipnir, is faster than any other horse, even faster than the wind, and can travel on ground, the air, and the sea. And the word Sleipnir may etymologically refer to gliding, slepa, a reference to the speed and ease with which he runs. Odin carries a spear, Gungnir, which always hits its target until the beginning of Ragnarök. Gungnir was forged as part of a sort of bet between Loke and some dwarven families, along with a set of other objects that belong to the gods. And that story we do not have time for today, maybe another time. Finally, or at least for now, I guess, Odin also has his arm ring Draupnir or Draupnir, meaning dripping, which multiplies itself into 8 new rings every 9 nights. And when his son Balder died, Odin takes the ring off his arm and places it in the pyre. But Balder sends it back from the underworld. Odin is fascinating to me because even though he is the god of war and rage, I so associate him with the search for knowledge and wisdom. I think in my mind he uses wisdom and smarts over violence, which, to some degree tends to be true, but violence still definitely a theme in his tales. I also think of him as a humble figure, and I think this is due to his skills as a shapeshifter. He goes by so many different names. This is just a list that I found on Wikipedia, just as a quick overview. The character of Odin has survived well beyond the Viking age as a legendary figure, as a folklore figure. Even into the 20th century, people believed he could come and visit you in the shape of the blind guest or a tattered roaming old man. If he comes by your farm or your land or where you're working, you do well to treat him well. Of course, he will never reveal who he is. And I have met older people in my life when I was younger who talked about Odin as a figure, as like a folklore figure. And yeah, I think that definitely plays into how I view him as a character. So then, what are runes? Like I said, the word rune itself means mystery or secret. And in my previous video, I mentioned that runes in this age held a deep meaning. In Viking society, you were held accountable by your actions and your words. And an oath held a power almost greater than any legal contract today. Natural forces held a lot of power, and the idea of making a mark was also thought as carrying a lot of meaning. It's irreversible, it alters something, potentially forever. And of course, runes were used to mark a memory, like this one rune stone from a man to commemorate his brother who died. And in this example, the runes clearly write out words. But Viking runes come in 2 different versions. There's the old version and the reboot. The Nornir, or the Fates, as I talked about in my last video, carve runes into Yggdrasil, the world tree. It's one of their functions as deciders of fate and weavers of the fabric of cosmos. The runes that they carve into the tree represent the finality of their decisions. Yeah, for more information, you can watch that video. So, in the context of the Nornir and the magic as it's used in Norse mythology, it's understood that it's potentially referring to the Elder Futhark, are symbols that are technically older than the Viking Age. Like, they were used during the Viking Age, but the use of them also predate the 400-year period that I mentioned. And even if Odin is the Allfather and king of the gods, he's still under the power of the Nornir. He cannot change their decisions, and they, or at least, their functions, continue after the end of the gods. But because Odin's thirst for knowledge is so great, he does all he can to gain more of it. He has Hugin and Munin who come and tell him of the latest happenings, sure. And then he gives one of his eye for the wisdom and knowledge in Mimir's well. All right, but what if he can harness the power of the runes? What if he can gain the knowledge and the secrets and their mysteries, right?
It is a gift.
Then he'll be set. But to gain something, you have to give something, as we see time and time again in the Norse tales. And even if you, like Loke, are able to find a loophole out of giving something up or sacrificing something, that debt always has to be paid in one way or another. And sometimes the compromise from a loophole is worse. However, Oden knows the cost of knowledge, and he is willing to pay. There's a phrase in Oden's song in the poem Havamal, in the Poetic Edda, which goes, "Gåva önskar att ge en gåva gives," which roughly translates to "gift demands repayment." So what does he do? Well, naturally, he hangs himself upside down from the world tree, with no food and no drink, for 9 nights, all the while cutting himself with his own spear, until he's on the brink of death. Jag vet att jag hängde på det vindiga trädet 9 hela nätter, djupt stungen med spjut och given åt Oden, jag själv åt mig själv. Uppe i det träd varom ingen vet av vad rot det runnit upp. Man bröd mig ej bar, ej bjöd mig horn. Skarpt jag nedåt skådade. Jag tog upp runor, med rop jag tog dem. Så föll jag åter därifrån. So after these 9 nights, the runes and their secrets appear to Oden. He can now wield their power, and with this power, he still can't change the fate's decisions, but he can alter them in a way. He can now raise the dead. He has gained necromantic powers. And he does this partly to learn the information they may possess, and he can also reanimate corpses. So again, we're here with Odin's obsessive nature when it comes to knowledge. But what is it that moves him to such extremes to find out every last bit of knowledge the world has to offer? Well, to put it simply, he's afraid. He knows what is to come in Ragnarök when the gods will fall, and he prepares for it, and is seeking knowledge of the best fighters and allies for that day. On top of all his own knowledge and skills, he keeps the head of Mimir, which has been chopped off in a previous war, and he has preserved this head with his powers of necromancy and various plants, and keeps him as counsel, as an advisor. And now I want to talk briefly about a part of reading Viking tales that is both fascinating and complicated. It's the application of this rhetorical device known as känning or kenning. It's a form of image-driven metaphor that is indirect by design. So, for example, if you're traveling by the whale's way, like the sea creature, the whale's way, you're traveling by sea. A sail horse is a ship. The human body is a house of bones, you know, because the bones live in there. Not a single aspect of this rewrite is a clear reference to what it actually means, which, when you attempt to discern the events from a 1,000-year-old tale, makes it difficult to understand what it actually means. This device isn't used just in Viking culture, but it's very prevalent in the surviving texts. As a fan of poetry, I really love the idea of kennings, and, you know, as a fan of mystery and riddles as well. I personally really like the idea that these old texts might hold a deeper or completely different meaning to what we read at face value. And I think also the confusing variations in details from different tales can begin to make sense, especially considering like the same thing might have several different names that are vastly different. But it does complicate things. Let's go back to Oden seeking knowledge in Mimir's well, which it suggested that Mimir's well is just another name for the world tree, Yggdrasil. So is it the sap from the world tree that Mimir guards? I also really like the suggestion that the well, in this case, is Mimir's blood, which, when you also consider the speculation that Mimir might be Oden's uncle on his mother's side, the giant Bestla, Well then, in that case, does the well of Mimer, the well of blood, does that refer to something else? Makes you wonder, he sacrificed an eye. Well, did he actually willingly sacrifice, or was there an altercation? But I like it because it can also give a different interpretation to Odin's animal companions. He's hounded by desire and rage, always at his heel, yet chooses deliberation and wisdom. His thoughts and memory fly far and wide, and he's deathly afraid to lose them, especially memory. So yeah, these aren't like official interpretations or anything or verified by anyone. It's just speculation. But I personally really like the extra layer it gives to the reading. So we've reached a point where we talk about the rune magic and what function it could have had in Viking society of this time. And now, just like Sade, which is the divination rituals performed by female practitioners called vulva, aside from some written sources, there's some surviving indications of this practice. I've specifically chosen to focus on Sweden this time, but rune carvings, aside from rune stones, have been found all over Scandinavia and Iceland and England, as well as other corners of the world that Vikings interacted with. Often it's inscriptions in bone that has survived, but some occur in stone and wood as well, or metal, I think copper plates, and also on tools, for examples, and other objects. Yeah, in preparation for this video, I had a great time sifting through the many records from Sigtuna Day, an annual scientific publication from Sigtuna Museum Archive, which is located north of Stockholm. They have hundreds of finds of rib bones with runic inscriptions of them that vary in meaning and interpretation. So, why is it that they have hundreds of rib bones in Sigtuna? Well, before Stockholm was officially formed and way before it was our capital here in Sweden, Sigtuna was a great Viking settlement and was home to one of the most famous Viking kings, I think, Olof Skötkonung. And he's famous because he was the first Viking ruler to be baptized into Christianity and also the first king to mint his own currency, making Sigtuna an even more important economic power. Sigtuna is one of the oldest cities in Sweden, and it's also the one with the most rune stones per square kilometer. And I think along with Uppsala in the middle Sweden, which is just a bit further north than Sigtuna, Sigtuna has a lot of Viking remnants and remains. Uppsala also grew into an important merchant town that people traveled to for trade and for religious events and festivals like Blut and such. So yeah, in some finds, runes have been repeated over and over again on these bones. And some interpretations say that repetitions in 3 or 6 or 9 might have specific magic significance. One bone that was found seemed to contain a healing spell, and it's written in the Younger Futark and reads, "The fever demon's wound causer, disappear from Krok. He bound the fever, and the sorcery crushed the fever and did away with the abscess. He has completely caught the pus, runaway fever, or fly fever." Important to note that Krok might not be an actual name, it could just be the sick one, like a name for being sick, Kroken. So yeah, the author for this particular article writes, "We have but a small degree of knowledge of how the Nordic people attempted to prevent or heal diseases. Aside from limited medicinal measures, magic played an important role. A sickness was sometimes viewed as a sickness creature within the body, which, with the aid of magic, could be identified, drawn out, and exorcised. An important discovery of a rune-carved rib dating to the end of the 11th century or the early 12th century, containing a magic inscription aimed at treating blood poisoning, was made during a 1996 excavation in Sigtuna. It complements the incantations against disease found in 1931 on a copper sheet incised with runes, as well as the Canterbury incantation found in the Cotton Caligula AXV4TO manuscript located at the British Library. The three incantations are varieties of one and the same Nordic incantations of a heathen character, meant to ward against disease, where the sickness creature is named, cajoled to come out, bound, and expelled. I found this Cotton Caligula document scanned in the British Library digital archive. It was pretty easy to find. I have an image here, a screen grab, and the runes are written out like this. Jaril's wound, leave now, you are found. Thor bind you, lord of Tursa, I'm not sure what that is. Jaril's wound, drive out the blood poisoning. The author of the same article that I mentioned earlier states that there's an evolution of the meaning or functions of these inscriptions, but that the function is largely depending on context. So these spells that were found on that particular rib bone, both the Cotton Caligula one and the copper plate or copper sheet, and the one on the rib bone that I showed earlier, are somewhat later in the era, and he states that they act as kind of a bridge to later European healing spells of this kind. And apparently there's a lively discussion within rune research, according to one of Cittanaday's articles. However, the inscriptions found on other bones and other objects, especially earlier finds, vary in significance. A linguistic context, for example, in connection with a personal name, could indicate a luck-bringing purpose, and a futhark written on a tool might be there for the protection of the tool or its owner. But the futhark inscriptions on the worthless ribs in Sigtuna, which is how they're referred to in this article, are of quite a different character and have been made for either educational purposes or as writing exercises, often unsuccessful. Rude. Yes, runes could be carved to imbue an object with a certain power or protection. Runes could be carved in conjunction with a healing spell or to ward off these sickness creatures. But also, it's suggested that these carved bones were used in an educational setting, allowing perhaps young Vikings or carvers to learn how to use these symbols to make marks. So yeah, the truth is always going to be a blend of the fantastical and the mundane. I'm going to have to stop here because I've been talking for a very long time and it's almost lunchtime now. I hope you found this enjoyable, even if it is really just a surface level look at this topic. There's so many stories and so much detail in Norse mythology and a variation of the same. It's impossible to try and condense everything into one because they intersect so much. So the balance of what to leave out to stay focused on this topic, yeah, I hope it still suffices. And I've used Swedish and or Scandinavian sources for this. If you are English speaking and you've only read English sources, then I apologize for my translations if I'm using words that are different to the ones that you would use. I've really tried to do my best. Going forward, I would like to make more videos about the Asynja, the female gods in the Norse, in Asgard, in the Norse pantheon. More videos about the beasts and creatures mentioned in the mythology. Thank you for letting me do this. It means a lot to get to share this, even if it is in an incomplete way. So yeah, I hope you have a wonderful rest of your week. I hope you're enjoying warmer weather if you're in the Northern Hemisphere. And yeah, I hope to see you back here soon. Take care. Did you know that the word rune means secret or mystery? Well, no. But how did he do that? But how did he do that? But how did he do that? How he do that? But how did he do that? But what happened?